Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about the natal chart of James Harden. Many of you may know James Harden. He is a prolific NBA player, NBA superstar. I couldn't get the time of birth online for him, so I did a solar sunrise chart for him. So anyway, chart analysis actually. But anyway, first thing off, as far as James Harden's chart goes, well, first thing is he has the Sun in Virgo, and with the Sun in Virgo, James could be very analytical. I see him very meticulous with details, very intellectual. Probably could do a very good job dissecting defenses on the court very easily. Now, he has the moon in Cancer, in which could give very emotional, perhaps subconscious need to be that savior or a rescuer. I think he shows that a lot on the court. If his team is ravaged with injuries, he goes in and he flat out, overcompensates. I think he really he'll work even harder, and it will even and really increase his offensive production, whatever he needs to do to help his team win. And really, and I think what he does is he injects a lot of the hard-working Virgo Sun energy into that Cancerian Moon energy in terms of being that rescuer or savior or what have you. He is also in this chart, the solar sunrise chart, he has the majority of the planets on the bottom half, or houses 1 through 6. The bottom half are below the horizon. Now, and he also has 9 of his major 12 astrological influences in feminine signs. I see the major astrological influences of being the 10 planets, the ascendant, and the midheaven. Of course, when you do a solar sunrise chart, the sun is going to be in the same sign as the ascendant anyway. But this can suggest a very introverted, introspective person, as opposed to being overly gregarious or extroverted, more pessimistic than optimistic, and more subjective than objective. He also has a preponderance of the planets on the left side of the chart, which could suggest a more self-reliant and independent nature as opposed to being dependent on others. This could give a very self-starting nature, and he likely doesn't need an overabundance of cajoling or coaxing from other people in order to get things started. So anyway, he also has as well, looking at this, he has 6 of his 12 major astrological influences are in earth signs. This could give a very strong amount of pragmatism, practicality, economical abilities, probably very astute in economical matters, and likely much planning and premeditative energy, and a lot of prudent energy, probably very judicious in matters. He has also 7 of his 12 major astrological influences are in cardinal signs. So this could accentuate an propensity to get things started very quickly. He might even start many projects simultaneously. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to finish all of them, but he's probably very action oriented, and cardinal dominant people often like to have a lot of activity and staying busy as opposed to being stagnant. I imagine he puts in a lot of minutes per game when he's on that floor. I imagine he probably really doesn't like to be idle too much or be out in terms of when I say out of the lineup, out of the game is what I'm actually meaning. But anyway, now again, it could also give him much initiative and enterprise. Now, his chart signature or final signature is in Capricorn, and this is not something that I'm, flabbergasted or in a big state of shock about, given his very serious style, very, almost undemonstrative nature I see on the court. He's very, seems to be very stern and serious. And he gives, and when you have, in the chart signature in a chart, it's supposed to give like an overall tone or feel or flow to the chart. But to me, at least, I don't believe it supersedes the sun, moon, or ascendant in terms of its significance or overall impact on the chart. Now, a Capricorn final signature may give a certain amount of discipline, very structure, consistency, and responsibility in the person. And I think really perhaps that is why James is very serious in many instances. He's very he's somebody, he doesn't strike me as somebody that's overly loquacious and talkative, and it shows to me that he could be somebody that sees where actions and ideas often take precedence over words. I think he really often prefers to let his actions speak volumes on the court. Now also too, I notice his chart pattern is a bowl pattern. Now this, when you have a bowl pattern in a chart, this could be a very strong concentration of energy and focus. This could suggest a nature about self-containment in somebody that could be very quiet, really maybe, or I should say not necessarily always quiet, could be, but more somebody that has a quest or purpose to fulfill, a very strong one, but it could also indicate he could be very engrossed in his own projects and endeavors, and he also has with the majority of the planets in his first quadrant in his chart, which of course the first quadrant consists of houses 1, 2, and 3. That could very well reinforce this. Now he likely, based on this bowl pattern, he likely doesn't let many extraneous things or outside influences deter him or affect him, and doesn't really believe much in diversions or distractions. Now, a lot of athletes will tell you that they're not really, looking at the newspaper, or they're not listening to things on TV, derogatory remarks or criticism pertaining to them or what have you. But I think, I mean, a lot of times they could be, I'm sure they're telling the truth. Some cases they may not be. But with James Harden, I don't know if he's ever stated if he ever listens to anything in terms of reporters or media or what have you, newspaper articles. But I think him, in contrast to a lot of other athletes, comparatively speaking, probably listens to it less, because he strikes me as somebody that has a lot of that single-minded focus, and his chart certainly is indicative of that. Now, also, and I don't really believe he's really much into any diversions or distractions, generally speaking. Now, the two planets on the ends of the bowl pattern in his chart are Jupiter and Neptune, and of course this could be very prominent in this energy. Now, Neptune in Capricorn is in the 5th house in the solar sunrise chart I did. And that could, and right there, I mean, that could be about, of course, attaining some kind of career dreams that could be tied into sports, being in the 5th house. And the Jupiter is in Cancer in his 11th house. Now, this could be about really a lot of really expanded, caring, rescuing, tenacious, and supportive energy in group-related matters, which I wouldn't exclude team situations. So that is where a lot of this bull energy, this concentration of energy and focus is being directed to, I would say. Now, another thing is what I noticed about this, and again, going back to Neptune and Capricorn in the 5th, could be about attaining career dreams and sports, and also the Jupiter, it really in Cancer in the 11th can give that enlarged, emphasized urge to be a rescuer in connection with a group, and again, that can include a basketball team. Now another thing is he has no planets or major astrological energy in fire, so there were no planets in fire in his chart, and his ascendant based on the solar sunrise chart and the midheaven are non-fire signs. Now, I don't know what his actual ascendant is, but it's a possibility that could be fire. But anyway, the point being, based on this chart, he has really, this shows with no major astrological energy in fire, that could indicate where you don't really see the surfeit of exuberance and enthusiasm or expansive energy. but at the same time, it could manifest an overcompensation to some degree. As far as leadership goes, he might feel more of a constant need for leadership, for filling that leadership void perhaps on his team, because there might be a strong sense of lack, since based on this chart he has no major astrological energy in fire signs. And another thing is he has no planets in this chart in the third quadrant of the chart. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that his relationships or even deep connections or foreign ones are insignificant or unimportant, but what it could indicate is that from a comparative standpoint, comparatively speaking to other sectors and areas of his chart, it may not be as important to him. Now, another thing about his chart, the chart ruler falls in his second house. Now, this could suggest a lot of that Virgo analytical energy can come out in that place where he is making his money, and given that it could be a lot of dissection as far as his values go, and into matters pertaining to self-worth and self-esteem. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, well, the next thing I want to talk about as far as his chart goes. Now, he also, what it could indicate, I mean, another thing I want to talk about is that what stands out to me is that he just has one planet in a fixed sign, and that's Pluto, generational planet, and really one major astrological energy in a fixed sign, because in this chart, the ascendant and midheaven are non-fixed signs as well. And this really can really, when you just have that one in there, I mean, anything between 0 and 1 of a certain quality or element, I mean, can show a certain lack in that area. I mean, this to me can indicate, and this is a generational planet, really it could show that he could have a lot of difficulty in being resolute and really about having intractable energy and putting his foot down when necessary. It could be lacking persistence to some degree. However, he does have some compensations by house placements. He has 6 planets in the fixed houses, which are succeedent. He has 2 in the second house, 2 in the 5th, and he has 2 planets in the 11th. So he does have some compensation by that, and he does have some strong Capricorn energy in his chart, even though that's not a fixed sign. That's still something where you could have a lot of single-minded energy with that. And again, the bulb pattern can show a somewhat very focused energy, and somebody that doesn't, as I stated before, generally may not allow much extraneous or outside influence to deter the purpose. I have a bulb chart. It might be considered a weak bulb chart. That's something I can get into another time. So I kind of understand about that energy, but I have a little more fixed energy than Harden does. Anyway, another thing is that he has, depending on time of birth, I want to say that Saturn I see as a planet in high focus. Again, this is where we're seeing a lot of that Capricorn-like energy come out strong with James Harden. I consider it a dominant planet in this chart, and depending on time of birth, it makes no fewer than 7 aspects as far as the planets, the ascendant and midheaven would go. We don't know, we don't know what it does to the actual ascendant or midheaven, because we don't know his time of birth, but I do know it makes no fewer than 7 aspects, and it is in its dignity. It's also involved in a Cardinal T-square configuration, and it's in a stellium as well. On top of that, it is retrograde, so it might give more emphasis and significance and attention to it. Now, given that his Saturn is retrograde, this could be an indicator that he may not always be cognizant of his limitations in matters, again, because being in this chart, it's in Saturn being in Capricorn in the 5th house. This could be someone that's not always cognizant of limitations that are career related and with matters with sports. And it shows that he may be taking on an inordinate amount of responsibility On top of that, he's currently going through his Saturn return. So this could be why lately he's been, the way it worked out for him, that he's had to perhaps take on a greater load than what he is used to, a customer acclimated to doing. Now, I forget the exact numbers, but at the time of this video that I'm making, he was on some scoring streak where he had averaged like about 37 points in the month of January. He had over 20 consecutive games, I believe, in which he had 30 or more points. He was in a stretch where he was averaging about 42 points per game or something, at least 40 per game. So he has been on a phenomenal roll, but there is a price for this, and he has taken on really, I mean, you're talking about an excessive amount of work and really had to work very laboriously. I think a lot of this extra responsibility a lot of this is attributed to the fact he is going through his Saturn return right now. Now, another thing about him is that he really, again, taking on a prodigious workload on the basketball court. And going back to Pluto, Pluto is, okay, it is a singleton planet in his chart. It is the only water sign. Now, it's also in this solar sunrise chart I cast for him. It's also intercepted, which could mean it could take on more emphasis. Pluto as a singleton, now in the third house, can give, I mean, this could be somebody that could give very pronounced energy on control and power in his communications. Now, I've talked before about him very reticent. He seems like he's very taciturn, very quiet, and he doesn't really talk much. When Pluto is in the third house, in some cases it can do everything but perhaps obliterate communication. He seems to be, again, a person about action. I'm not saying he doesn't have any communicative ability. I'm sure he does. With his sun in intellectual, analytical Virgo, and he does, I know he has Mercury and Venus are both in Libra, so he has some air energy, and in the solar sunrise chart, Gemini is on the midheaven, but he just, to me, does not seem like somebody that is really that much about talking, and a lot of it could be that Pluto in that third house and being intercepted, and the thing about it is, when you have an intercepted planet, it could be a lot of distortion and vacillation of energy. It might seem like it's dormant one moment, but then the next moment it might come out very strong. And what could happen is there could be times when it's coming out very strong, maybe too strong, when he just goes to a point where he will not really maybe do much talking, period. Or it's really could be an overemphasis perhaps on having this control in his communications. Many of you that have watched James Harden, or big basketball fans, can see that he's very, a lot of discipline, a lot of control. A lot of that is attributed to that strong Capricorn energy I talked about. But I think some of this can also be connected and tied in with the fact that he is really, when you're talking about Pluto in the third house, this could be about a strong need to control what you're saying to others. And it's about having that power and connection with your rational mind and being able to have control in your communications. And I think he really does emphasize that very strongly in terms of his verbal responses to others and ability to be able to be thinking rational. A lot of you may have seen when when other players have tried to bait him and try to provoke him or goad him or whatever, and he really he is not very, he's not about being confrontational. He generally will walk away and will control his thinking very strongly in terms of his emotional, in terms of responding in an irrational manner. Now, the thing about him too is, another thing that I wanted to get at is that he, looking at his chart, is also somebody, I want to talk a little bit about the Cardinal T-square configuration he has. Now, that consists of the moon, Jupiter in Cancer conjunction in the 11th house. And now the moon in Cancer, of course, is based on the solar sunrise chart. It conjuncts Jupiter in Cancer in the 11th house, which could be an enlarged need for caring, being a rescuer of the team, and making that team collectively better. It opposes Uranus, Neptune, Saturn conjunction in the 4th and 5th house, and that could be very strong responsibility for career ambitions that are connected with sports and personal popularity, since you have the 5th house involved. Now, the focal point in this is the Mercury and Venus in Libra in the 2nd house. Now, and that could be about valuing and appeasing, accommodating energy through self-reliance. And when I say through self-reliance, because you're talking about the 2nd house. 2nd house corresponds with Taurus in astrology. This could be very self-reliant energy. So really, so basically that focal point, that what I just described, could be that point of overcompensation, overemphasis. This is something where basically he's basically what the focal point of a cardinal T-square configuration is. Basically the point is what you're doing to find some resolution to the opposition in the cardinal T-square configuration. So you basically have that, all that energy, with Capricorn and that a lot of 5th house involved with attaining really there's a lot of that career ambition and personal popularity. But then you also have that energy in the 11th, when he's trying to incorporate some energy into doing things as far as for the team, and something group related, which is not as much self-aggrandizing energy, I guess you could say. It's more about that energy is about being the rescuer and savior for the team, since we're talking about the 11th house and Cancer energy. And Jupiter and Cancer involve, of course, very enlarged Cancer and Cancerian-like energy as well. So basically, what happens as a result of that, given that you're talking about that focal point in terms of Mercury in Libra and Venus in Libra in the 2nd house, this could be where a lot of that energy could be, especially perhaps the Venus. Venus in Libra in the 2nd is about this appeasing and enjoyment of appeasing and accommodating others, perhaps, or in those relationships, which he may want to do. So I think what happens is, the way this may manifest on the court is that he might be trying to be fair, so to speak, or trying to appease others by taking on maybe a little bit more than what he needs to do, by appeasing his teammates, by going out there and almost always having to be that dominant person, by having to accommodate others. So when you look at a cardinal T-square configuration, you look at the point which is opposite that focal point in it, as a way to maybe alleviate some of that tension and connection with the energy, but not eradicate it completely. So the opposite point of that focal point in that cardinal T-square configuration is Aries in the 8th house. Hold on a moment, people. Sorry about that, I'm back. But anyway, and basically what I would say as far as James Harden goes, the way you can alleviate some of that tension and exasperation and connection with that focal point, which of course, as I talked about before, the focal point of that cardinal T-square configuration, which is Mercury and Venus and Libra in the 2nd house. The opposite point of that, which of course is Aries in the 8th house, and that opposite point, well, you probably wonder, how would that energy work? How would that manifest in terms of maybe alleviating some of that tension for Harden? Well, the way that could manifest, I would think, would be maybe, since you're talking about the 8th house is considered like house of support, it's considered moral, emotional support, but I think you can look at that as support in general. Aries is aggressive and assertive energy. He may have to allow his teammates a little more to give him that assertive and aggressive support, where he don't have to necessarily do everything himself. I think a lot of that, again, The fact that he's got that Venus, especially that Venus in Libra, in that second house, being that focal point of the Cardinal T-square configuration, is the fact that he could be overly perhaps appeasing and accommodating for others in his terms of his relationships, but that could also be with the connections he has on his team. And I think as a result, consequently, sometimes he takes on a little bit more than he needs to. And having Saturn retrograde probably does not help matters as far as that goes. But I think basically what I'm saying is, in summation, having that point opposite of his focal point, that Cardinal T-square configuration, Aries in the 8th, letting someone else be strong and help him out and be able to give him the support that he needs, because I do believe he needs more than maybe he's willing to acknowledge. I don't think the reason necessarily that he's very consistently the dominant person on the court is because he's egocentric or he's about self-aggrandizement. The reason, I think, is because he believes he needs to carry that extra workload, because sometimes if his team is ravaged with injuries or what have you, he may not have any other choice. But when he has his team healthy, he certainly has perhaps the opportunity to let others maybe factor in a little bit more in terms of production on the team, so he can give himself a little bit of a break. But with his energy in his chart, I think it just with hard-working, industrious Sun in Virgo and that strong Capricorn energy, he just finds it, I think, very difficult to do so. Anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for my analysis of James Harden's natal chart. Stay tuned next time, where I am going to be giving you my Scorpio February 2019 horoscope forecast, part 1. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.